Iran has had an aspiration to be self-sufficient in enriched uranium in order to achieve a nuclear energy program. They have built a heavy water reactor in Arak. Heavy water is used to sustain the chemical reaction within a nuclear power plant. The concern is that heavy water reactors also can be used to create plutonium, the chemical needed to create a nuclear weapon. That being said, there are legitimate medical uses for heavy water reactors, and so the creation of a heavy water reactor does not guarantee a desire for a nuclear weapon. They have also built centrifuges to enrich uranium so that it is viable as nuclear fuel. These centrifuges work at a very small scale, and so thousands are needed to enrich successfully. These centrifuges are grouped together to work in a cascade. Prior to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, Iran had 19,000 of these centrifuges. This enriching took place in 3 facilities: Natanz, Bushehr, and Fordow. A nuclear Iran worried many in the international community, leading to the signing of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action.
And here are the key aspects of the JCPOA. The agreement allows the International Atomic Energy Agency complete access to all nuclear sites in Iran. Additionally, a roadmap has been created to allow for an investigation into Western suspicions that Iran may have been developing a nuclear weapon. Moving on to uranium enrichment, 2/3 of these enriching centrifuges are now in storage. 5,090 of them are enriching uranium in the Natanz facility through IR1 centrifuges, the oldest, least efficient forms. Prior to the JCPOA, uranium enrichment was at 20%. 20% is the lower limit of highly enriched uranium. Whilst not weapons grade, i.e. 85% and above, a large accumulation of 20% enriched uranium can be a springboard to 90% enriched weapons grade uranium. That being said, Iran enriching at 20% does not in and of itself prove a desire for a nuclear weapon, as 20% enrichment can be considered the upper limit of enriching for civil uses. The JCPOA agreement reduces it to 3.7%. Enrichment lower than 20% is classed as lowly enriched reactor-grade uranium, i.e. it can be used as nuclear fuel, but not nearly enough for a weapon. Additionally, the amount of total uranium Iran can possess drops from 7,500 kilograms to 300 kilograms. The formerly secret facility in Fordow is restricted as well. Iran had 16 of these cascades filled with IR1 centrifuges. As part of the JCPOA, Iran agrees to halt 4 of these completely, whilst 2 continue to run without uranium for non-military research purposes. The rest are placed into IAEA storage. The heavy water reactor core in Arak has been filled with concrete. A 130-ton limit is placed on the amount of heavy water Iran can possess. In return, sanctions were lifted. Most importantly, Iran's oil embargo. This embargo had cost Iran $160 billion in lost revenue between 2012 and 2016. They were also given back $100 billion in frozen assets.
As we know, the US has now withdrawn from the JCPOA. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has come out and given 12 demands that must be met for the US to enter a new deal with Iran. These demands can be separated into 4 key categories: nuclear demands, terror support demands, geopolitical demands, and domestic demands. The nuclear demands are as follows. Pompeo demands total access for the IAEA to Iran's nuclear facilities, and for them to end the alleged nuclear military program. Iran has always maintained that any such program has never and will never exist. Encouragingly, Supreme Leader Khamenei has reiterated his fatwa denouncing nuclear weapons on numerous occasions in recent years. Pompeo has also demanded that Iran stops uranium enrichment entirely. Enrichment is currently at 3.7%. His final nuclear demand is that Iran never processes plutonium and shuts down their heavy water reactor. Iran maintains it has zero desire for a weapon and does not need plutonium. Iran also claims it would like to transition to light water processing in order to continue with current technological trends.
We now move on to terror support. Pompeo's demand for Iran and the Revolutionary Guards Quds Force specifically to cease support for Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, Hamas, Al-Qaeda, and the Taliban. Hezbollah and Iran are too connected to end their support. Hezbollah were recently successful in the Lebanese elections that took place on the 6th of May, claiming nearly a third of the seats. They are simply too important a regional ally for Iran. With regards to Iranian support for Palestinian terror groups, as Pompeo describes them, Iran does support Islamic Jihad in Gaza, but it is difficult to provide support outside of funding due to the current blockade. Iran's relationship with Hamas is fractured after Hamas condemned Bashar Assad. Hamas would like to regain Iran's favour, but they currently do not have it. Hamas are currently led by Ismail Haniyeh, Khalid Mashal, and Mahmoud al-Zahar. Their influence correlates to their ability to bring in outside funding. External funding for Gaza comes primarily from the UAE through their proxy Mohammed Dahlan and Qatar, with much of this inevitably being channeled through Hamas. Looking at Pompeo's demand concerning ending support for Al-Qaeda, Iran has in fact been fighting groups affiliated with Al-Qaeda, such as Al-Nusra Front in Syria. They consider Al-Qaeda enemies. And finally, Pompeo demands that Iran ends its support for the Taliban. The nature of the Taliban means that this issue is far more complicated. The Taliban is a collective name for a wide variety of groups. Historically speaking, the word Taliban describes 2 different types of entity. The first is the organized militia with connections to the Pakistani ISI formed back in the 1990s. The second is the separate localized resistances formed after the US intervention in the 2000s. Iran's support will be for specific forms of these localized resistances. Iran's concern in Afghanistan is its border. It will exert its influence in Herat, known as Little Iran, because it stands adjacent to this border. Iran is also concerned about having a strong US presence as a neighbour. That being said, Iran does not seek a Taliban-run Afghanistan. Iran's concern is primarily for its border rather than any expansionist desires. This is an especially acute issue due to Iran's current drug epidemic. Iran has a serious problem with opium and heroin, the vast majority of which comes from Afghanistan.
From here, we move on to the geopolitical demands, i.e. Iran's actions in Iraq, Yemen, and Syria. Beginning with Iraq, Iran would like to have Iraq as a puppet state. It is unlikely to give up this desire anytime soon. Currently, the kingmaker in Iraq is Muqtada al-Sadr. Al-Sadr has pushed a nationalist agenda and tried to remove himself from allying with Iran. However, he appears to be in the process of forming a coalition with Hadi al-Amri and his Fatah alliance. This alliance is made up from many actors within the Popular Mobilization Forces. These are Shia militias, many of whom are supported by Iran. That being said, Sadr's coalition also includes people like Ammar al-Hakim, who heads the Majlis group, and Ayad Alawi, who heads the secular Al-Wataniya alliance, both far more independent from Iran. Certainly, Muqtada al-Sadr's rise is a blow for Iran. Pompeo also demands Iran ends its support of the Houthi rebels in Yemen. Iran has historically armed these Houthi rebels. Nevertheless, Iran's support for the Houthis is limited at best. Iran are not a major player in the Yemeni civil war, and even if they did have aspirations here, Saudi Arabia's blockade of Yemen is too strong. The area that is not up for debate is Iran's involvement in Syria. Assad is a major ally to Iran, and leaving Syria goes against their hegemonic plans. Iran may be open to ostensibly changing the manner of their military presence, i.e. in an advisory capacity, but it would not remove its military from the country.
And finally, we have domestic demands. First is the demand to end the proliferation of ballistic missiles in Iran. Iran has made a unilateral concession in the limiting of the missile range to 2,000 kilometers, as the head of the IRGC, Mohammad Ali Jafari, announced in October. The Iranian establishment considers this negotiable. The release of all US and ally citizens currently imprisoned in Iran is a difficult subject, however. Firstly, many of these individuals are dual citizens, meaning they are subject to Iranian law. And secondly, Iran can be a paranoid country when it comes to sabotage and espionage. There is a recent history of scientists being assassinated and plants being sabotaged, such as the release of the computer virus Stuxnet in 2010, as well as the bombing that killed 17 people at the Madaris missile base in 2011. Thus, individuals such as Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe, who have been charged with attempted toppling of the government, will be tricky to negotiate. And more obvious cases of espionage, like the American Robert Levinson, even more so. That being said, it will not be impossible to achieve. Finally, and this leads us on to the last section of the presentation, the demand to stop threats to US allies such as Israel and Saudi Arabia. Iran has not threatened Saudi Arabia at all in recent years. But where there has been very public animosity is with Israel. Both parties have exchanged threats with one another. The major issue here is the death to America and death to Israel chants that take place at Friday prayer. Moderates, like President Rouhani, would very much like to end this practice as well.
That concludes Pompeo's demands and brings us neatly on to the relationship between Israel and Iran. This has always been hostile, but has recently appeared to be on the brink of war. Firstly, there have been some back and forth proxy attacks. In April, Israel attacked the Iranian-controlled T4 airbase in Syria. A day after Trump's announcement to withdraw from the JCPOA, Iran responded with an attack on the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. Israel then responded the following day, attacking multiple Iranian targets with several casualties. Additionally, the Knesset has implemented a law granting greater powers to Benjamin Netanyahu. Previously, he required the entire cabinet support to be able to declare war. Now, he only needs the support of Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman in extreme circumstances. However, the possibility of war is not as likely as many fear. This law has received pushback from across the political spectrum, and more importantly, the generals are opposed to war with Iran. Additionally, the Supreme Leader has given the IRGC complete autonomy with respect to decisions in times of war. Israel has been informed by the IRGC that any attack on Iranian soil would be responded to in kind within 1 minute. Therefore, Israel would somehow need to execute a perfectly coordinated attack that destroyed Iran's missile capability in one go. Such an attack is impossible. If the US was willing to get involved in such a conflict, then the two would have the firepower needed, but war would still be very damaging to Israel.
Furthermore, outside of Iran, Hezbollah's response would be immediate. Hezbollah possesses 25,000 soldiers, 30,000 reservists, and 95,000 rockets. Remember that in the war between Israel and Hezbollah in 2006, the entire population of northern Israel was forced to flee south due to Hezbollah's rocket barrage. With this in mind, the cost to Israel and to Iran would be too great to truly entertain the idea of a war between the two.
In the last few days, Iran has responded to Pompeo's demands. Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif has laid out 15 demands of his own. However, these are mostly rhetorical, with the odd exception, such as the demand for the US to denuclearize Israel. Thank you for listening.